The Scout's misjudgment. The crystalline spires of the Egot homeworld pierced the violet sky like needles through silk, their surfaces refracting the light of 3 setting suns. High above the capital city of Nexus Prime, Scout Commander Eek stood before the massive observation window of his personal quarters, his spindly 7-foot frame casting an elongated shadow across the polished floor. "Computer, display the preliminary report on Earth's military capabilities," he commanded, his voice carrying the characteristic aristocratic lilt of the Egot ruling class. A holographic display materialized before him, casting his silver skin in a pale blue glow. The images that flickered before him showed what he considered to be laughably primitive weapons, projectile-based firearms, tracked vehicles with metal tubes attached to them, and crude flying machines that still relied on atmospheric lift. It was almost insulting that High Command had assigned him to assess such a backward species. "Fascinating," he murmured, though his tone suggested anything but. "They haven't even developed basic plasma technology." He waved away the display with a dismissive gesture of his elongated fingers. The Egots had ruled the known galaxy for 10,000 years, their technological superiority unchallenged, their might unquestioned. They were the self-proclaimed guardians of civilization, determining which species were worthy of joining the galactic community and which needed to be removed for the greater good. Eek's assignment was simple: conduct a final assessment of humanity's capabilities before the invasion fleet arrived. It was a formality, really. The decision had already been made in all but name. Humanity's continued existence was an affront to the natural order, a species of primitive apes somehow managing to achieve spaceflight through the crudest means imaginable. His transport ship, the Celestial Decree, would arrive at Earth in 3 standard cycles. It was a masterpiece of Egot engineering, capable of bending spacetime itself, yet small enough to avoid detection by humanity's primitive scanning systems. Not that their detection would matter, the Egots had never lost a war, never failed in a conquest. Before departing, Eeks decided to consult the Forbidden Archives, records of species that had been deemed unworthy of existence. He found himself drawn to the section on extinct civilizations that had dared to resist Egot dominion. The Krell, the Azurians, the Merovingians, all had fallen before the might of the Egot fleet. Yet something about the human file troubled him. Unlike other species, humans seemed to possess an almost irrational resistance to conquest. Previous reconnaissance missions had reported instances of humans continuing to fight even when victory was mathematically impossible. The reports dismissed this as primitive stubbornness, but Eeks wondered if there might be more to it. "Computer, show me human military history," he commanded. The display came to life again, showing centuries of warfare. The images were brutal, primitive, masses of humans charging at each other with increasingly deadly weapons. But what caught his attention was their rate of weapons development. Where other species took millennia to progress from gunpowder to nuclear weapons, humans had done it in just a few centuries. "Curious," he muttered, making a mental note to investigate further once he reached Earth. Not that it would change anything, the invasion would proceed regardless. But Eeks prided himself on being thorough. The journey to Earth was uneventful, filled with the usual administrative tasks of preparing invasion reports and cataloging human weaknesses. Eeks spent much of his time studying their weapons, particularly something called an AK-47, that seemed to appear in conflicts across their planet. Such a primitive device, using controlled explosions to propel metal projectiles. The Egots had abandoned such technology eons ago in favor of energy weapons. Upon reaching Earth's orbit, Eeks decided to make personal contact with some of the planet's less reputable elements. His intelligence suggested that human arms dealers would be the perfect source of information about their military capabilities. These creatures would sell anything for the right price, even to obvious aliens, a sign of their species' moral bankruptcy. He arranged a meeting through intermediaries with 2 notorious smugglers in a remote location. The coordinates led him to an abandoned warehouse in what humans called Kazakhstan. The building was dilapidated, its metal walls rusting, a perfect metaphor for humanity's decaying civilization, he thought. The smugglers were exactly what he expected, small, nervous creatures who seemed more interested in profit than loyalty to their species. They had brought with them several examples of human weapons, including the infamous AK-47. As Eeks lifted the weapon, he was struck by how cold and primitive it felt. The metal bore the scars of use, its surface marked with scratches and wear. How fitting that humanity's most iconic weapon would be as crude as they were. "This is one of theirs?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. The smugglers nodded eagerly, their eyes darting between him and the exit. They were clearly uncomfortable in his presence, as they should be. "Tell me," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "are they simple creatures, these humans?" The smugglers looked at each other, shrugged, and replied in unison, "Don't know." Their response amused him. Of course they wouldn't know, how could such simple creatures understand their own limitations? The weapon in his hands confirmed everything the preliminary reports had suggested: humanity was hopelessly outmatched. Eeks allowed himself a moment of theatrical contemplation, pacing the warehouse floor with exaggerated steps. Humanity, he proclaimed to his unwitting audience, the apes of Earth, feared across the stars for reasons that are beyond me. These puny creatures, all this time they've been hiding behind glorified slingshots, advanced pebble throwers. He laughed, the sound echoing off the warehouse walls. Oh dear, that isn't right. We can't let them keep going on like that, can we?" The smugglers stared at him blankly, clearly not appreciating the cosmic joke they were part of. Eeks didn't care, their role in this drama was nearly complete. In that moment, with the cold, dead AK-47 in his hand, Eeks made a decision that would alter the course of galactic history. His report would recommend immediate invasion, but not out of fear of human military might. No, he would recommend it out of pity, to save the galaxy from having to witness humanity's continued fumbling toward civilization. He dropped the weapon to the floor with a dramatic flourish. "Keep your trash," he sneered, turning away from the now agitated smugglers. Their protests followed him as he left, but he paid them no mind. A lion cares not for the opinions of sheep, and an egot cares not for anything beyond itself. Returning to his ship, Eeks began preparing his report for the High Command. He would recommend an immediate full-scale invasion, presenting humanity's primitive weapons as evidence of their unworthiness to exist in the modern galaxy. The egots would be doing the universe a favor by removing such an embarrassment from existence. But as he sat in his command chair, watching Earth rotate slowly beneath him, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered a warning. He had seen something in those human historical records, a pattern of adaptation, of turning weakness into strength. He dismissed the thought as quickly as it came. After all, what could a species that still relied on projectile weapons possibly do against the might of the egot fleet? The report was transmitted, and within hours, the response came: the invasion fleet was already on its way. Eeks felt a surge of pride. Soon, he would be known as the scout who had identified yet another species unworthy of existence. His name would be recorded in the great archives as the one who had saved the galaxy from the embarrassment of humanity. As he prepared to rendezvous with the invasion fleet, Eeks took one final look at the blue planet below. Such a shame, he mused, that they never evolved beyond throwing rocks at each other. He couldn't have known then that his dismissal of humanity's primitive weapons would prove to be the greatest mistake in egot history. The age-old saying that pride comes before a fall was about to be demonstrated on a galactic scale, and Eeks had just written the first chapter of his species' downfall. The price of pride. The invasion fleet emerged from hyperspace like a silver tide washing across Earth's sky. 3,000 ships, each one a masterpiece of egot engineering, arranged themselves in perfect geometric patterns above every major human city. Their hulls gleamed in the sunlight, a display of power meant to inspire awe and terror in the primitive species below. Fleet Admiral Vex stood on the bridge of the flagship, Eternal Dominion, her elongated frame draped in ceremonial silver robes that matched the color of her skin. She watched the tactical displays with an expression of mild boredom, as if orchestrating the extinction of a species was little more than a tedious administrative task. "Scout Commander Eeks," she addressed the smaller Egot standing beside her, "your report suggested this would be a simple cleansing operation. Do you maintain that assessment?" Eeks bowed deeply, his spindly fingers interlaced in a gesture of respect. "Indeed, most exalted one. Their weapons are laughably primitive. They still rely on chemical propellants and kinetic energy, barely more advanced than throwing stones." The Admiral's lips curled into a slight smile. "Then let us begin the ceremony of cleansing. Signal the fleet to take their positions for the first wave." Across Earth, humans reacted to the alien armada with a mix of fear, defiance, and, most surprisingly to the Egots, preparation. Military bases buzzed with activity, civilian populations were evacuated with practiced efficiency, and government leaders convened in secure locations. It was almost as if they had been expecting this. "Most curious," Vex noted, watching the organized chaos below. "They seem to have protocols in place for extraterrestrial contact." "Primitive entertainment, nothing more," Eeks dismissed. "They create stories about alien invasions. It seems they've deluded themselves into thinking they could resist such an event." The first wave of the invasion began with surgical precision. Egot-dropped ships descended through the atmosphere, their energy shields deflecting the primitive missiles and projectiles the humans launched in response. Each ship carried a contingent of Egot warriors, equipped with plasma weapons that could reduce organic matter to ash in seconds. The initial landings targeted military installations, bases, weapons depots, and command centers. The Egots expected minimal resistance. After all, what could primitive projectile weapons do against their advanced energy shields? The answer came in the form of thunder. At Fort Bragg, North Carolina, Master Sergeant James Cooper watched the alien ships descend through his binoculars. Unlike the panicking civilians in nearby cities, he wore a slight smile. Beside him, his fellow soldiers waited in carefully concealed positions, their weapons ready. "Remember, boys," he drawled, puffing on his ever-present cigar, "those fancy shields of theirs? They're calibrated for energy weapons and high-speed projectiles. Let's see how they handle good old-fashioned buckshot." When the first Egot warriors emerged from their ships, striding forward with the arrogant confidence of inevitable victory, they were met with a devastating surprise. The humans had positioned ancient weapons alongside their modern ones, black powder muskets, lever-action rifles, and shotguns that fired at velocities just slow enough to slip through the energy shield's detection threshold. The first volley dropped dozens of Egot warriors, their supposedly impenetrable armor punctured by lead balls moving at speeds their shields had been programmed to ignore as harmless. The aliens' screams of surprise and pain were music to Cooper's ears. "Welcome to Earth, you arrogant bastards," he muttered, signaling for the next phase of the defense. Aboard the Eternal Dominion, chaos erupted as reports flooded in from landing sites across the globe. Egot warriors were falling to primitive weapons, their shields useless against projectiles that should have been harmless. Worse still, the humans seemed to be adapting their tactics in real time, using their knowledge of the Egots' technological weaknesses against them. "Impossible!" Eeks shouted, watching the casualty report scroll across his display. "These are simple creatures. They can't possibly have figured out the shield harmonics so quickly." Admiral Vex's expression had transformed from boredom to intense concentration. "It seems, Scout Commander, that your assessment of their capabilities was incomplete. These humans are far more adaptable than you suggested." The second wave of landings fared no better than the first. Humans had begun mixing their weapons and tactics in unpredictable ways. When the Egots adjusted their shields to block slow-moving projectiles, the humans switched to high-velocity rounds. When the aliens modified their armor to resist physical impacts, the humans brought out thermite charges and white phosphorus. But it was the third wave that truly demonstrated humanity's capacity for innovative warfare. The Egots had never encountered a species that could adapt its tactics so quickly, that could turn seemingly primitive technology into devastatingly effective weapons. In the skies above London, Egot-dropped ships encountered swarms of crude remote-controlled aircraft, what the humans called drones, carrying small explosive payloads. The drones themselves posed no threat to the advanced alien ships, but they saturated the targeting systems and created chaos in the carefully coordinated invasion patterns. While the Egot ships were distracted by the drones, human fighters struck from below, using the oldest trick in aerial combat, attacking from the direction of the sun. Their missiles, guided by targeting systems far more sophisticated than the Egots had believed possible, found weak points in the alien ship's armor. Admiral Vex watched in growing horror as the casualty reports continued to mount. The humans weren't just resisting, they were winning. Every adaptation the Egots made was met with a countermeasure, every technological advantage was turned against them through clever exploitation of its limitations. "Scout Commander Eeks," she said, her voice cold with fury, "you assured us their weapons were primitive. That they were simple creatures who relied on advanced pebble throwers. Explain to me why these simple creatures are decimating our landing forces." Eeks stood trembling before her, his earlier arrogance replaced by growing terror. I may have underestimated their tactical capabilities, most exalted one. But their weapons are primitive. I saw them myself. Did you? Vex asked, stepping closer to him. Or did you see what they wanted you to see? Did it never occur to you that a species might deliberately show inferior weapons to lull their enemies into a false sense of superiority? Before Eeks could respond, a new alert blared through the command center. Human forces had begun targeting the fleet's command and control systems with electronic warfare techniques that shouldn't have been possible with their level of technology. Ships began losing coordination with each other, their carefully planned attack patterns dissolving into chaos. Most Exalted One, a communications officer called out, "We're detecting massive energy signatures from the planet's surface. They appear to be some form of electromagnetic pulse weapons, but the signatures don't match any known technology." Vex turned to watch the tactical display as dozens of Egot ships began losing power, their advanced systems vulnerable to the primitive but effective human weapons. The elegant invasion plan was unraveling, and with it, 3,000 years of Egot military doctrine. "You fool," she hissed at Eeks. "You saw their weapons and assumed they were primitive because they were different from ours. You never stopped to consider that there might be advantages to simpler technology, that complexity isn't always superiority." As if to punctuate her words, a massive explosion rocked the flagship. Emergency alerts blared as damage reports flooded in. Somehow, the humans had managed to sneak a nuclear device aboard, disguised as debris from a destroyed dropship. "All ships, emergency withdrawal." Vex commanded, watching as her mighty fleet was slowly but surely being torn apart by a species they had dismissed as primitive. "Regroup at Rally Point Alpha." As the Egot fleet retreated in disarray, leaving behind hundreds of destroyed ships and thousands of dead warriors, Master Sergeant Cooper stood on the smoking battlefield outside Fort Bragg. He picked up a fallen Egot plasma rifle, studying its elegant but overcomplicated design. "You know what your problem is?" he asked the dead alien at his feet, taking a long drag from his cigar. "You forgot the first rule of warfare. It's not about having the best weapons. It's about using what you have in ways your enemy doesn't expect." The battle was over, but the war was just beginning. And humanity had sent a clear message to the galaxy: underestimate us at your peril. Turning the tide. The Egot High Council chamber was in an uproar. For the first time in 3,000 years, the normally stoic and dignified rulers of the galaxy were shouting over each other like common primitives. The defeat at Earth had shaken their civilization to its core. High Counselor Zara, her silver robes now bearing the black band of mourning for the fallen warriors, stood at the center of the chaos. The holographic displays around her showed the devastating footage from Earth, Egot ships falling from the sky, warriors cut down by primitive projectile weapons, and most horrifyingly, humans adapting Egot technology for their own use. Silence, she commanded, her voice cutting through the din. This display is beneath us. We are egots, not squabbling lesser beings. Admiral Vex stood before the council, her own robes scorched from the battle. High Counselor, the humans, they are unlike any species we have encountered. They don't fight like civilized beings. They adapt, improvise, use our own technology against us in ways we never considered possible. Explain, Zara demanded. They've already reverse-engineered portions of our shield technology. But instead of replicating it, they're modifying it in ways our scientists hadn't thought possible. They're creating hybrid weapons that combine their primitive projectile technology with our energy systems. The council chamber erupted in fresh murmurs of disbelief. A younger counselor stood up, his voice trembling with rage. Impossible. Our technology is based on principles their primitive minds couldn't begin to comprehend. With respect, Counselor, Vex replied, her voice hard with recent experience, they don't need to comprehend it to use it. They're like children who found a plasma rifle, they may not understand the theoretical physics behind it, but they can certainly figure out which end makes things explode. Meanwhile, on Earth, humanity was not resting on its laurels. In underground facilities across the globe, scientists and engineers worked feverishly to understand and adapt the alien technology left behind from the failed invasion. At Area 51, Dr. Sarah Chen stood before a captured EGOT drop ship, her team scanning its systems with a mix of cutting-edge sensors and jerry-rigged equipment. Look at this, she said to General Williams, pointing to a holographic display. Their technology is incredibly advanced, but it's also incredibly rigid. They've optimized everything to the point where there's no room for adaptation. The general nodded, remembering the surprising effectiveness of ancient weapons against the aliens' shields. Can we use that against them? We already are, Sarah smiled, leading him to another section of the facility. We've taken their shield technology and deliberately de-optimized it. Made it messier, more flexible. It uses more energy, but it can adapt to new threats in real time. In another part of the facility, Master Sergeant Cooper was working with a team of Special Forces operators, teaching them how to combine old and new weapons in ways the EGOTs wouldn't expect. Remember, he drawled, holding up a modified AK-47 with alien technology grafted onto it, these bastards think in straight lines. We need to think in spirals. The weapon he held was a perfect example of humanity's approach to warfare. It looked crude, almost primitive, but contained sophisticated alien technology merged with human ingenuity. The rifle still fired traditional bullets, but now they were encased in miniature force fields that could penetrate EGOT shields. Back in the EGOT home system, Scout Commander Eek sat in his prison cell, awaiting execution for his failure. But before his sentence could be carried out, an unexpected visitor arrived. Scout Commander, High Counselor Zara said, stepping into his cell. Tell me again about your encounter with the human weapons dealers. Eeks looked up, confusion clear on his elongated features. Most Exalted One, I've already recounted that meeting in my reports. Yes, but this time, I want you to tell me what you didn't include in those reports. What details did you dismiss as insignificant? As Eek spoke, describing every detail of his encounter, Zara's expression grew increasingly troubled. You said they seemed nervous, that they kept looking at the exits? Yes, Most Exalted One. I assumed it was natural fear of our superior species. Or perhaps, Zara mused, they were buying time. Perhaps they knew exactly what you were and were deliberately showing you what they wanted you to see. The realization hit Eeks like a physical blow. A trap. But that would mean, Zara finished, that humans had been preparing for extraterrestrial contact long before we arrived. That their apparent primitiveness is a carefully constructed facade. On Earth, those preparations were accelerating. The United Nations Space Defense Force, hastily formed after the invasion, was already launching its first ships. They weren't beautiful or elegant like EGOT vessels, they were ugly, brutal things that combined human industrial might with adapted alien technology. Sarah Chen stood in the command center, watching as the first human-alien hybrid ships took flight. "They're not pretty," she admitted to General Williams, "but they're effective. We've taken their technology and made it our own." "How long until the egots return?" the general asked. "Not long," Sarah replied, her eyes on the screens showing the growing human fleet. "But this time, we'll be ready. And we won't just be defending, we're taking the fight to them." In orbit, the new human ships conducted their first training exercises. They looked like someone had welded alien technology onto Earth vessels, because that's exactly what had happened. But beneath their crude appearance lay sophisticated systems that combined the best of both worlds. The flagship of the fleet, christened Humanity's Pride, was a perfect example. It looked like a traditional aircraft carrier that had been adapted for spaceflight, its hull studded with a mix of human and alien weapons. The flight deck launched both F-35s modified for space combat and captured Egot fighters piloted by human crews. But the real surprise was hidden within the ship's seemingly primitive exterior. The entire vessel was a giant trap, designed to appear vulnerable while concealing weapon systems that would make even the Egots pause. In the Egot home system, High Counselor Zara made a decision that would change the course of the war. "We have underestimated humanity at every turn," she announced to the High Council. "We assumed their technological differences represented inferiority. We were wrong." "What do you propose?" another counselor asked. "We must study them, understand them. Their strength lies not in their technology, but in their adaptability, their creativity, their willingness to embrace chaos and turn it to their advantage." But even as she spoke, human ships were already on their way. They had reversed the Egot's own hyperspace technology, creating drives that were less efficient but far more flexible than the originals. The counter-invasion was about to begin. Master Sergeant Cooper stood on the bridge of a human destroyer, watching the stars streak by. In his hand, he held his trusted AK-47, now modified with alien technology but still fundamentally the same weapon. It was a symbol of humanity's approach to warfare, taking the old and making it new, combining the primitive with the advanced in ways their enemies couldn't predict. "They thought our weapons were jokes," he said to his crew. "Time to show them just how funny we can be." The human fleet moved through hyperspace like a swarm of angry wasps, each ship carrying weapons that defied conventional military doctrine. They were coming to show the galaxy that humanity's primitive technology, combined with their adaptability and creativity, made them a force to be reckoned with. The Egots were about to learn that sometimes, the simplest weapons could be the most devastating, especially when wielded by a species that specialized in turning their enemies' strengths against them. Breaking the Empire. The Egot Border Defense Fleet never saw the first wave of human attacks coming. They were looking for sophisticated energy signatures, massive fleet formations, and the telltale distortions of hyperspace travel. Instead, what they got were shipping containers. Thousands of seemingly harmless cargo containers, drifting through space on ballistic trajectories, had slipped past their advanced detection systems. The Egot sensors, calibrated to detect advanced technology, completely ignored these primitive objects. It was only when the containers burst open, releasing swarms of hybrid human Egot drones, that the aliens realized their mistake. Admiral Chen, formerly Dr. Sarah Chen, watched from the bridge of the Humanity's Pride as chaos erupted across the Egot defense line. Her promotion from scientist to fleet commander had raised eyebrows, but no one could deny her intimate understanding of both human and Egot technology. "Status report," she commanded, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were attempting. "First wave of Trojan units performing as expected, Admiral," her tactical officer reported. "Egot fleet formations are breaking up, just as predicted. They're trying to adapt their shields to our hybrid weapons, but they can't adapt to everything at once," Chen finished, allowing herself a small smile. "Launch the second wave." The second wave was even more unconventional than the first. The human fleet had taken inspiration from Earth's maritime history, particularly the Q ships of World War I, merchant vessels modified to carry hidden weapons. Their ships appeared to be crude, partially destroyed vessels, leaking atmosphere and trailing debris. The Egots, already struggling to deal with the drone swarms, made the fatal mistake of dismissing these apparently crippled ships as battle damage. It was only when the vessels suddenly shed their false outer hulls, revealing batteries of hybrid weapons, that they realized their error. On the Egot command ship, Imperial Destiny, Fleet Commander Tsar watched in horror as his carefully organized defense crumbled. "Impossible," he sputtered, his elongated fingers dancing across tactical displays. "Their ships shouldn't be able to function in that condition." "Sir," his second-in-command interrupted, "we're detecting new signatures, but they don't make any sense. They appear to be using our own hyperspace wake signatures, but, corrupted somehow." Before Tsar could respond, space itself seemed to tear open. Human ships emerged from hyperspace, but not in the elegant, precise manner of Egot vessels. These ships burst forth like predators, their hybrid drives creating unpredictable distortions that played havoc with Egot targeting systems. Aboard one of these ships, the newly promoted Colonel James Cooper grinned around his cigar as he watched the Egot fleet scatter. His vessel, the Bold Tricks, was a perfect example of humanity's new approach to space warfare. It looked like it had been cobbled together from spare parts, because it had been. "Remember folks," he drawled over the ship-wide comm, "we're not here to win pretty. We're here to win dirty. Execute Operation Backfire." The Old Tricks and its sister ships began launching what appeared to be primitive nuclear missiles. The Egots, following standard doctrine, raised their strongest energy shields. It was exactly what humanity had counted on. The missiles weren't nuclear weapons at all, they were electromagnetic pulse generators combined with captured Egot technology. When they detonated, they created feedback loops in the aliens' sophisticated shield systems, causing cascading failures throughout their fleet. Back on the Humanity's Pride, Admiral Chen watched the battle unfold with clinical precision. "Begin Phase 3, she ordered. "And get me a direct channel to High Counselor Zara. I believe she'll want to discuss terms." Phase 3 was perhaps the most audacious part of the human battle plan. While the main fleet engaged the Egot defenders, smaller ships had been positioning themselves near the system's secondary planets. These ships began launching what appeared to be mining equipment, crude, industrial machines that the Egot sensors classified as non-threats. In reality, these machines were carrying payloads of modified nanites, reverse-engineered from captured Egot technology but deliberately programmed to be less efficient and more adaptable. As they burrowed into the planet's surfaces, they began converting local materials into more hybrid weapons and ships. High Counselor Zara received the transmission request in the midst of emergency council sessions. The human admiral's image appeared before them, projected in the center of the council chamber. "Greetings, High Counselor," Chen said, her tone professionally neutral. "I trust we have your attention now." "You." Zara struggled to maintain her composure. "You cannot possibly hope to defeat the entire Egot Empire with these primitive tricks. Can't we?" Chen's expression hardened. "Your empire spans 1,000 worlds, true. But how many of those worlds have you made completely dependent on your advanced technology? How many could resist an enemy that turns that very technology against them?" As if to emphasize her point, reports began flooding in from across Egot space. Human hybrid ships were appearing in system after system, using tactics that defied conventional military doctrine. They weren't trying to defeat the Egots in traditional battles, they were undermining the very foundations of their technological civilization. "Your civilization is built on the assumption that more advanced technology always wins," Chen continued. "We're proving that assumption wrong with every battle. Your ships can't adapt quickly enough because they're too perfect, too specialized. Ours can because we designed them to be imperfect, to have room for improvisation." Colonel Cooper's voice cut in on a secondary channel. "Ma'am, Phase 3 is complete. We've got manufacturing bases established on 17 worlds. They'll never be able to root them all out. The more they destroy, the more raw materials they give us to work with. Zara looked around at her fellow council members, seeing the same realization dawn on their faces. The humans weren't just fighting a war, they were restructuring the very nature of warfare itself. What are your terms? Zara finally asked, her voice heavy with the weight of inevitability. Simple, Chen replied. Acknowledge humanity's right to exist as equals. End your practice of judging species based on technological conformity to your standards. And she allowed herself a small smile, we'll teach you how to make your own technology more adaptable. After all, the galaxy's a big place. We might both need that flexibility someday. As the negotiations began, Colonel Cooper stood in his ship's cargo bay, examining their latest creation. It was an AK-47, modified with EGAT technology but still recognizably the same weapon that had started this whole conflict. But now it represented something more, a bridge between the primitive and the advanced, a symbol of humanity's unique approach to progress. You know what your biggest mistake was? He addressed the weapon, as if speaking to the entire EGAT civilization. You forgot that sometimes the old ways stick around because they work. And when you combine them with new ideas. He chambered around in the hybrid rifle, that's when things get really interesting. The war wasn't over, but its outcome was no longer in doubt. Humanity had proven that true advancement wasn't about abandoning the past for the future, it was about finding ways to make them work together. The galaxy would never be the same. In a secret facility beneath the Nevada desert, Cooper and Eek stood before a display case containing the original AK-47 that had started it all. The weapon had been preserved as a reminder of how appearances could be deceiving. You know what the funny thing is? Cooper mused, tapping the glass. If you hadn't dismissed this as primitive, if you hadn't let your pride blind you to its effectiveness, none of this would have happened. Your empire might still be standing, unchanged and unchallenged. And we would be poorer for it, Eeks replied, surprising himself with the sincerity of his words. We needed to fall to rise again, to learn that true strength lies not in perfection, but in adaptability. Above them, in the clear Nevada sky, ships of human, EGAT, and hybrid design soared past. Some were elegant and streamlined, others looked cobbled together from spare parts, but all represented the new philosophy that had emerged from the war: diversity breeds resilience. Admiral Chen, watching from her office at the Academy, reflected on the changes the past 5 years had brought. The invasion that had been meant to eliminate humanity had instead forced both species to evolve. The EGATs had learned humility and adaptability, while humans had gained access to advanced technology without losing their innovative spirit. You know what the real weapon was? She asked her mixed class of human and EGAT students. It wasn't the AK-47, or any other piece of technology. It was the ability to see beyond our preconceptions, to recognize that progress can take many forms. As night fell over New Shanghai, Eeks and Cooper stood on a balcony overlooking the hybrid city. The former scout commander held up a glass in a toast. To primitive weapons, he said with a self-deprecating smile. And advanced thinking, Cooper added, clinking his glass against the aliens. Below them, the city hummed with activity, a living symbol of what could be achieved when different approaches were allowed to complement each other rather than compete. The galaxy had changed, and for once, change had made it stronger rather than weaker. The story of humanity's insane weapon had become legend throughout the galaxy, though its meaning had evolved. It wasn't about the superiority of one approach over another, but about the danger of assuming that different meant inferior. The true weapon had been the idea that progress didn't have to follow a single path, an idea that had transformed not just warfare, but civilization itself. In the end, both humanity and the EGATs had won something far more valuable than a war. They had won a future where advancement meant more than just moving forward, it meant being able to move in any direction necessary to meet the challenges ahead.